Muitas vezes a gente vem para congressos internacionais para ouvir o que o mundo tem a nos dizer, mas dessa vez o jogo virou. A gente está aqui no Total Rewards para apresentar para vocês uma das palestras mais ricas, densas e provocativas que passaram por esses palcos. E ela foi entregue por um grande amigo e profissional de RH, Felipe Cruz, da nossa casa, nossa gente. Nós decidimos tornar esse conteúdo público direto para o Brasil, porque o que você vai ver agora não é apenas teoria. É um manifesto sobre o futuro da nossa área de remuneração e a forma como a gente se comporta e a gente posiciona a forma de recompensar. O Felipe levou para o coração do maior evento de remuneração do mundo uma discussão que tira qualquer profissional da zona de conforto e nos obriga a encarar os nossos processos com outros olhos. Eu quero te fazer um convite. Você vai ser provocado. Permita-se ser mudado pelo que você vai ouvir. A ideia aqui é aguçar a sua percepção técnica e estratégica, para que você saia dessa apresentação com a vontade imediata de transformar a sua realidade. E fique atento até o final, hein? Além de toda essa base conceitual, o Felipe apresentou uma ferramenta prática para você aplicar exatamente tudo o que foi discutido. É o conceito e execução no mesmo lugar, tá? O conteúdo original foi em inglês, mas o YouTube está aqui para nos apoiar, então você pode ativar a legenda agora, ou se a dublagem automática estiver liberada, excelente, você já pode colocar tudo em português e ouvir em português. Aproveita, se inscreve no nosso canal e prepare-se para elevar o seu nível de jogo. Pronto para questionar a mediana?
Hello everyone, it's a privilege to be here with all of you today. I've come all the way from Brazil, so if you all have any questions about Carnival, Rio, or want to discuss the World Cup, please feel free to reach out to me after the session. But the reason I'm here today is a bit different, and let me start with my story. For the first 10 years of my compensation career, I was a data guy. My entire focus was on providing the best possible benchmarking for the companies. And I truly believe that if you had the most accurate market data, you are winning. However, recently I took over the reward strategy front at Carreira Muller, a compensation firm in Brazil, and I hit a wall. When I start offering strategic compensation solutions to our long-time survey clients, many of them gave me the same answer. Felipe, why do I need a strategy? The salary survey is my strategy. And that's when I realized that there might be a gap in the markets. We have overvalued benchmarking to the point where it has become one of the enemies of strategy itself. Companies are so focused on market practice that they forget to connect to their own business strategy. And this brings us to our session today. Organizational effectiveness and leadership, how leadership strategies influence total rewards outcomes. Our mission today is simple, to bridge this gap. We're going to move on from being market neutral to being business effective. So I hope you all like data because I brought a lot for this session. And let's begin with the agenda for today. I broke down our session into 3 parts. First, on beyond market data, we're going to address and understand the current state of compensation strategies worldwide. We're going to understand the benchmarking trap through the value gap and realize what is the real impact of this benchmarking obsession. Then, in the second part, the alignment challenge, we're going to see 3 of the biggest barriers that prevent companies from achieving this alignment with the business strategy. And then, as in the final part, on bridging the gap, we're going to create a compensation strategy together in real time, totally connected to your business objectives. In order to do that, I will present and I will use an open source framework that I developed specific for this session. And by the way, this same framework will be shared with all of you after our session. So let's begin. Before we dive into the how, we need to understand the why. Why is this conversation so critical right now? So, according to the World at Work Global Total Reward Survey, strategic alignment of total rewards with business strategy is the first priority for companies nowadays. In my understanding, total rewards leaders recognize how important that is, but also acknowledge how currently disconnected we are from compensation strategies to business objectives. This is warning because it's highly unlikely that a company will be able to achieve the expected outcomes from a compensation strategy without this alignment. However, turning this vision into a reality is far from easy. Let's take a look at the current state of compensation strategies and understand why this has become such a priority for companies in 2026. As you can see in the first data, we have a strategic maturity gap. 61% of companies claim to have a formal total reward strategy. And it's actually just 61% in my opinion, because while we are all here talking about how to get the best outcomes from your compensation strategy or how to connect them with your business goals, there's a huge portion of the market that doesn't even have a plan. And here's the real catch. Because even among the companies that claim to have a formal total reward strategy, 43% of those companies admit that their own compensation strategy is misaligned with their business goals. The numbers show that their approach is more about following the market than actually getting connection to their business strategy. Let's understand a bit more of those strategies and especially how they are connected with the markets. Because first, how these call compensation strategies are working. We can see the median as our global standard. When you look into those strategies, 63% of companies connect their strategies with the market median, globally speaking. And when you look into the Brazilian data, the reference is even stronger because 7% of companies connect their compensation strategy with the business goals, with the market median, sorry. In my experience as a consultant, I couldn't agree more with this data because I can relate that the vast majority of the companies chose to connect their compensation strategy with the market median. And there's nothing wrong with the market median itself if you think about it, but the amount of companies connecting those strategies just with the market median is what always bothers me. Because each one of these companies has completely different goals, different cultures, different group of talents, and they are still connecting their strategy the same way as everyone else. If you think about it, there's nothing more benchmarking driven than the market median. It is the safest path, represents neutrality. But if most companies are choosing the same path, the same strategy, we're not seeing compensation strategies anymore. We're just seeing commodities. And this is warning. Because even the safest path in total rewards can come with some risks. So, I'm sorry, but I'm a huge sports fan and I couldn't leave this session without a sports analogy. For those who doesn't know who this guy is, this is Vitor Wembanyama from San Antonio Spurs. I've seen this guy play yesterday and I've seen someone so that tall before. It was amazing. And he's a generational talent. He's one of the best NBA players in the world, if not the best. But imagine that the San Antonio Spurs hire us to design their compensation strategy. And we decided to go with the marketing median. So we would have to address Victor about it and say, okay, Victor, from now on, you are going to be paid exactly the market median for an NBA player. Which is not bad. I would love to earn that actually. But of course, it's not great for Victor. But we all know what would happen, right? Because if you choose the benchmarking path, we are choosing the neutrality way. And almost we are sending the message that we are treating our talents as commodities. And if you treat our top talents as commodities, they will feel discouraged, they won't feel motivated anymore, and more importantly, they will end up leaving our company. Strategy lives in what I call the delta. The delta is the intentional difference between the market practice and your own compensation strategy. Like a business itself, you need to have something in your total rewards programs that actually sets you apart from your competitors. That is unique in your total rewards programs. You need to have a differentiator. I would like to all think about that for a second. Don't have to answer that, just think about it. If in your own total rewards programs, do you have something that is unique in your strategy? That is something that no one else is doing. That is something that really sets you apart from your competitors. If you come out with nothing, don't worry, but I have some sad news. You're probably living in what I call the benchmarking trap, as most companies are. And this benchmarking trap presents some real challenge to the companies because I showed this data and I call it the value gap because it's how I see compensation strategies nowadays and how even the data can prove it to us. This data shows that 77% of companies claiming their own compensation strategy as just not effective. So we are seeing people and companies spending millions of dollars every year only to their own rate their strategy as not effective. This number could be even higher because a lot of compensation strategies are called effective because they are able to hire new employees and capital low turnover. But this should be the bare minimum expected for a compensation strategy, in my opinion. And we're not just talking about the base salary because when you look into incentives, we can see that just 1/3 of the companies align their variable pay, align their incentives with their business strategy. We all expect to drive specific behaviors from our incentives programs. But if you're not able to connect them with your business strategy, what kind of behaviors are we driving? What kind of behaviors are your incentives with these programs? We're just wasting a very important tool without this connection. And to close the gap in total rewards programs, we have the impact on benefits as well. Just 27% of companies prioritize listening to and attending what their employees really want as benefits instead of following the benchmarking. So we have, by one side, what your employees really need and really want, and you have on the other side the market practice. And the companies are still choosing the market practice instead of listening and attending their needs of their own employees. We are really stuck in a cycle of spending money based on what other people do, instead of connecting and listening to our own business needs and our own employee needs. And this comes with a heavy tool. This is why I showed this slide and I call it the performance tool, because I'm really seeing this benchmarking obsession as a chain reaction. First, we have the impact on trust. If the companies doesn't truly believe into their own compensation strategy, they will not be able to communicate it properly with their employees. And if your employees don't trust the system, they don't know the logic, they don't trust the system, and the employee trust in the company drops by 63%. That is the first chain. The second link is on productivity, because we are expected to drive productivity from our compensation programs. But if you're not able to explain the rules of the game for them, they are 50% less likely to become high performers. So basically, we are paying, but we're not getting what we bought. We're not getting the productivity that we are expected from these programs. And finally, we have the most visible impact of all, that is on retention. If the employees have the perception of unfairness, they are 75% more likely to look for a new job. And look at this word, perceive. I'm not talking about companies that are paying above the market, aligned with the market, or below the market. If I fail to communicate it properly, my total reward strategy for my employees, there will always be the feeling of unfairness, the perception of unfairness. So until I address the communicators properly, there will always be this perception. This is why this connection is so important. We're not dealing with a HR problem anymore. We're dealing with organizational problem. I hope by now that we all could understand and realize how important that alignment is, but achieving that is not an easy task. So I will show 3 of the biggest barriers that companies face when trying to achieve this alignment. And the first one that I call is the one that I show as cost center mindset. CEOs say all the time that people are our greatest assets. But in practice, many companies don't actually see people as a lever for growth. And this is why 81% of CFOs still view HR as a cost center, not as a strategic value driver. And I'm not sure if I can blame them because I really think that there is a huge language barrier. And I'm not talking about my Portuguese to English. I'm talking about HR being able to communicate it properly with finance. Because we're talking different language. Finance talks about the scoreboard. They talks about revenue, margin, profit, ROI, while HR usually brings to the table some subjective concepts. And they fail to connect those concepts with the bottom line. We usually show some data that, for instance, our turnover increased 4% last year. But what does that mean? Imagine that instead of saying that our turnover increased by 4%, we say that because of our turnover increase of 4%, we had an increase of costs about 1.5 million in higher costs and trading costs. Imagine that instead of saying that our engagement level drops 25%, we connect them and say that because of the drop in our engagement level, we had an impact on our net promoter score, and this brings to a loss of our client retention rate. And this leads to a revenue loss of $10 million. We need to be able to create and arguments with these correlations. If we're not able to correlate what these isolated numbers are, we're not be able to show the impact on the business itself. And these arguments must always be about finance, about numbers, because that's why they will be able to see the impact of each one of these actions. In talking about finance, I bring another barrier that I usually face in the markets. That is the one that is called budget constraints. 54% of companies claims that rigid budget constraints is the main reason for them not doing anything different in the total rewards strategy. So they are saying that I'm being more cautious about my strategy because I don't have money to do anything different. But I challenge this assumption because I really think that we are actually wasting money on market parity. We are wasting money on peanut butter raises instead of being strategically about our resources. And when we have limited resources, and I mean, who doesn't? That's when you have to be even more surgical and creative about that. We need to be able to prioritize those resources, prioritize these numbers in order to be the more strategically possible. But this is why the alignment with the compensation of the business itself is so important. Because if you doesn't know what the business itself wants, what is their strategy, you will not be able to drive the specific behaviors because of that. So we will always struggle with our budgets because we ended up just following the market's practice, just following the benchmark. And as the final barrier that I show is the one that I call the communication gap. I've seen companies spending months designing perfectly, technically great compensation strategies, only to see they fail during execution. And why is that? Because they fail to communicate it properly with their team. Look at this number, for instance. Just 24% of employees claims to recognize why they are being paid, the criteria and logic behind their compensation. Just 24% of our employees recognize that. So we have a huge communication gap. And if the why in rewards remains a mystery, we'll never be able to transfer these programs into an engine of effectiveness. We'll never be able to achieve the expected results from that because we're struggling still with transparency. Basically, what I'm trying to say is a strategy that is not communicated properly is a strategy that does not exist. That's my point. We need to be able to communicate it properly, our strategy to our employees. But of course, first, we need to be able to understand why your compensation strategy is important. Because if you're just following the benchmarking, you are just following the market practice, we're not be able to address those questions, those hard questions. Because if an employee approaches me and I answer to him, I'm doing that because it's the market practice, because it's what everyone else is doing, it's not a proper answer in my opinion. The proper answer is we are paying you what you are paying, what you are getting, because the business itself decided that way. Because we put a strategy in those numbers. I cannot argument with my team, with my employee, with everyone, just using the benchmarking stuff, just using the benchmarking arguments. So I show a problem and the barriers that companies face when trying to achieve the alignment with compensation strategies, with business goals. But I admit that it's not an easy task. So in order to present a proposed solution for this matter, I developed an open source framework with the idea of connecting the questions that consultancy firms usually ask for their clients before recommended a compensation strategy. So before we dive into that, let's play as consultants and simulate our clients. So we have a client that is really is struggling now. They have 1,200 employees, and they have seen their market share drops by 15% last year. They are struggling with heavy cost pressure. Their basic salary is so high, they're not being able to hire anyone. They suffer from low engagement from their incentive programs because they fail to connect those programs with the business goals. And they are suffering from the market benchmarking trap. So they decided the market parity instead of being strategically about their resources. So now I'm going to present the framework and trying to solve this problem with the solution that I developed. Like I said before, I developed this framework trying to get and gathering some questions that compensation consultants firms ask for their clients, for the CEO, for the C-level, before propose a compensation strategy. And I had some questions that I thought was important. Just to be clear, this is not a product, this is not a service that I will be sharing with all of you after a session. And I started this framework by addressing 5 dimensions that I think that are really important in order to create a proper compensation strategy. We're going to address business objective, culture, our talent group, our compensation focus, and our leadership intent. After addressing all those questions, we just check the budget if we have enough money to apply this recommended strategy. And and then we'll be tested if this compensation strategy it is or is not aligned with your business goals. So the first question that I'm asking for the company, it is one related to business objectives. The question is, what are our primary objective for the upcoming cycle? This is a question that must be made and answered by the C-level, the CFO, CHRO in general. For instance, we have some options like a company can choose that they are on a turnaround and recovery scenario, or they are on market conservation, or they are on a merger and acquisition, or they are when we are aggressive expansion. Each one of these options be related to a compensation strategy. After all the questions were answered, an algorithm will run and gather all the data and suggest a proper compensation strategy according to each one of your answers. So, as we see, our example was a company that was financially struggling with cash. So, because of that, the best scenario for them is the turnaround and recovery scenario. That's the one that I was looking for. So, I select that and then go to the next one. So, the second question that we ask it is what level of competitiveness we would like to foster. This is really important because I really think that our compensation program is a really drive of behaviors. And the kind of behaviors that will be incentives is the one that need to be really clear for our company. For instance, I would like a cooperative environment with minimal internal competition. It will be the low option, or I would like a moderated environment with balanced competition and with collaboration from everyone else. Or I would like to foster an environment of high or very high performance differentiation. So I would like to foster this kind of behavior in our employees. And actually, in the case of our clients, they really need some short-term results. So they cannot afford to go with the cooperative environment to wait for some results to come. So they will go with a very high approach of clear differentiation between their employees because of their need of short-term results. So I will choose the very high and then go to the next one. This is the second question about culture. We already addressed the question about the business. Now is the second question about culture. That is, what is your organization primary focus? They are focused on processes, people, results, or any innovation. And why this question is so important? Because, for instance, if my company focus is on results or innovation, I cannot have a focus on that and be hiring employees with no experience at all and trying to train them internally. The focus of my organization needs to be related to what kind of employees I would like to recruit. And of course, if I do want some employees that will drive innovation, short-term results, I will have to pay more for them. I have to be more aggressive with that. So I or can choose the process and people scenario. So if I have a company has so high standardization in their process, they can even allow themselves to lose some employees because they can recover them easily. So, and if I go with a people environment, of course, if I choose the people way as our main focus, I cannot be more aggressive in variable pay. I have to be more conservative because I will focus more on retention than short-term results. In this case, this company is in an urgency, so I will choose the results way and then keep it going with my framework. Now I'm addressing one question about the business objectives and two questions about culture. And then I will now address some questions about talents. And this needs to be answered by the C-level as well, because what will be my preferred approach to building talents? I will go with develop internally, I will go with hire red professionals, or I will go with attract top performers. Of course, we would like to go with attract top performance for everyone else. It is the easiest path. I don't have to train anyone, I don't have to be a training program for them, but not everyone can afford this kind of program. So in this case, we will go with develop internally. Even though this company needs some short-term results, they cannot afford to hire top right professionals. So they will have to go with develop internally for themselves. And of course, this is mainly a more conservative approach, more conservative strategy. So another question about our talent group is the one that is really important because now we're settled that our general strategy is one, but that doesn't mean that we can't have more than one strategy to our company. For instance, in these questions, I would like the company to classify their talent group. So how scarce they are. For instance, my talent group, they are more operational or they are more professional. Professional are like essential core with balanced market supply. So they are not so rare to find in the market. So I maybe can afford to lose them, or I can afford to have the same strategy as the general group for them because I'm not so afraid to lose them in the middle of my process. But I have some companies that will classify their talents as really scarce. For instance, if I classify them as strategic and mission critical, I'm sending a clear message to the algorithm that in this specific case, I will have to run a different strategy for them. I will have to run a more aggressive approach for them instead of following the same strategy as the rest of the group. So in this case, this company just cannot afford to lose these clients. It is such importance way. They are not in a rather recovery scenario, so they cannot afford to lose any of their talents in this process. So they will go with a strategic approach, and we are settling a specific strategy for this group. After addressing another two questions about talent, just now we start talking more objective about compensation because I asked the company and the C-level itself, where do you want to focus your compensation investment? This is more clear for us because if I focus on benefits, I will sending a clear message that I will be more focused on retention than attraction. I will be able to retain more my employees, but it's really difficult that I will be able to hire a talent just with my benefits package, not the usual. If I go with variable pay, variable compensation, I'm choosing the path of competitiveness. So I will be able to be more conservative about my basic salary, about my fixed costs, and be more aggressive in my variable pay. So would like we are actually driving a more competitive environment, but in the same way, it is the environment that I really like it because it's a win-win model. If the employee help the company to achieve the results, they will be rewarded properly. And we can go with fixed compensation. This is the easiest scenario because if you go with fixed compensation, it's easier to attract new talents, it's easier to justify and explain my total rewards program to my employees. So it is the easiest path, but it's the more expensive as well. And I can go with a balanced approach that is more actually neutral approach, and I will be like trying to be competitive in each one of these options. So in this case, this company cannot afford to increase their fixed costs anymore, so they'll have to go with variable compensation to create a win-win scenario. And then as the final dimension of our framework, we will address the leadership intent. This is really important because the level of communication that my managers have will determine how aggressive I can be in my compensation strategy. Because, for instance, if I have managers that actually act just as a mailbox for HR, if the employees question him and he answers that, oh, I couldn't give you a raise because the HR didn't let me, or I don't know why you are getting just a 3% raise instead of 10% raise. This is an HR problem. It's an HR subject. If I have managers like that, I will have to be more conservative about my approach because they will not be able to communicate it a more intelligent and strategically program. But in of course, the main cause of that it is I will have to throw more money into my employees because it is easier to explain when I throw my money for them. But if I really have managers that are able to communicate this, my total rewards program, at least explain the logic behind this, I will be able to be more aggressive and creative about my scenario, about my strategy. So we have four options here. Just as silent and reactive, these are managers that are just mailbox for HR, and as influential, strategic, and aligned. For this specific simulation, we can dream of having compensation managers that are being able to communicate our strategy properly. So we will choose the aligned and active approach. And now we just set the budget for our program. Then we'll just define the headcounts. That will be around 9,000. Okay. Then the monthly payroll, around 6 millions, and the total rewards budget that we have currently. Because now the algorithm will just verify that if you have enough budget to apply this recommended strategy. And this is interesting because if you hire a project from a consultant's firm, you'll be a consultant suggesting this project for you. And now I just replace the consultant for algorithm, and the algorithm will suggest the best compensation strategy for this specific scenario. Then I generate a strategy, and as you can see, we have a totally strategically recommended strategy for the company according to all the answers. So each one of those answers is right here. And this is just the explanation behind those strategies. So you'll be able to, the algorithm will justify why they recommended each one of those strategies for the companies. And another thing that's really cool is that we really run away from the market media because In this specific scenario, a company will be working on basic salary on P25. They will working on their variable pay as P75. So they will be able to keep low cost with their compensation program, but they will be able to be more aggressive and kind of rewarded if the employees really help the company to achieve their results. So they'll go with P75. And as benefits, they will be market aligned. This is the strategy for the main group, but doesn't mean that we have the same strategy for everyone. Because when you look into our strategic talents, there will be a totally different strategy for them. We'll be more aggressive for them. So for them, we'll finally work with the market median just on base salary. First, on variable pay, we'll choose the P90 for them. We'll be more aggressive than for the general group. Because on that question before, we rated them as strategic for our business. So we cannot have the same strategy if we rate them as really strategic for our business. And as benefits, we work with aggressive approach because we really have to work on their retention level. And the algorithm will even indicate how precisely these compensation strategy are regarding the answers that I had previously. For instance, in this scenario, we have an alignment of 82% of our compensation strategy. What that means that some of our answers were not aligned with our needs. Like we did say that we need some short-term results, but we choose to develop internally. That doesn't match with what we need. So I would like to all after our session to really run your compensation strategy and check it with this algorithm how much you are aligned with your business goals regarding your compensation strategy. And imagine that even in this strategy, the algorithm suggests the market median for everyone else, as we're just criticizing. But it will be totally different because we're not choosing the market just because of the market parity. We are creating a compensation strategy from within, from intentional. We're being strategic and intentional about what you're creating, what you're doing. If you run this path, we'll be able to communicate this properly with our employees with much more confidence because we design it and we'll know why behind the rewards. Sometimes doesn't even we know the why behind the rewards because we're just following the benchmark. So this is why this is really important. As of course, after a session, you can scan this framework and check it for yourself. You can restart the diagnostics and run some simulated scenarios that you realize. But coming back to the presentation, so as we wrap up, I just would like to leave you with some key takeaways of our session. And the first one is escape the benchmarking trap. Sometimes we are wasting our budgets and trying to follow market parity and trying to follow other companies, and we're just wasting resources on that. We're just giving peanut butter raises because it's easily, we're just following sometimes pay equity because of transparency issues, and we're just not being intentional about our strategy. And this leads to a second point. Strategy dictates the data, not the other way around. We need to be intentionally about our compensation program. In order to do that, we need to connect them with our business strategy. We need to connect them with our business goals. That is the only way that you can drive our compensation program into an engine of effectiveness. And I really think that we can turn our compensation program into a real important resource for our business. We can really help our business to achieve the expected results. We have to stop this mentality of CFOs that we are a cost area, that this is an investment. We can justify this program with ROI. We can justify not as a cost, as an investment. We can really be a strategic area. We can need design a strategic compensation program, and you can really be and drive organizational effectiveness from that. But in order to do that, we need to be intentional and strategically about our compensation program. And the first one is precision is the ultimate budget optimizer. This is really important because stop wasting money on market parity, stop wasting money on benchmarking, be strategically and intentional about your resources. we have to do that in order to transform this program into an engine of effectiveness. Don't let the market be the pilot of your ship. Be the architect of your own compensation program. Thank you very much for your time. Now, I would like to go out to scan this framework, which tested is it's really cool, but so I really recommend that you all to test it and check it. If your own compensation strategy it is or it's not related to your business goals.
And additionally, we had a question in the app, if you're okay with that. We have a question that says, how do you escape the benchmarking trap when market data is still the main language leadership trusts?
Yes, that's a great question because I really think that the search for the market practice or leadership ask for market practice because we're not being intentional about it. And if someone questions that, oh, why are you suggesting that? Who else is doing that? It is the wrong question because they do not understand that this reward strategy cannot come from outside. It needs to come from within. So if you receive this kind of questions, we need to address that we're not doing that because everyone else is doing. We're doing that because it's related to our business objectives, it's related to our KPIs, it's related to what our business actually needs. That is the right answer. Because even if I do connect and explain that I'm doing this practice because it's what everyone else is doing, it's not the proper answer. And it's not the one that will be escalated and actually approved by this level, at least in my opinion.